Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 371 of Humanity Rising. Yesterday, we embarked on a 3-day program on intentional change, an issue that is critical for we humans to appreciate, internalize, and act upon at this very critical moment in human history. Today, we want to look at the issue of civilization, the complexities of civilization, some of the events in civilization that have contributed to the establishment globally of dominator models of coercion and hierarchy that have repressed human beings worldwide and over time. As we continue to contemplate how we, in the midst of society as it is, and civilization as it has developed to the present day, how it can be reworked, how it can be juggled in a very fundamental way, but also in a lighthearted way to empower human beings infused with all sorts of potential, but repressed by civilizational, societal, religious, cultural taboos and restrictions that inhibit us from being who we essentially are. So that's our topic today. Before we jump in, I want to invite everyone to just sit back and pause and just realize that you're in a body. Take a moment, take a breath. Feel your body and attune yourself with your heart for the next minute or so. See if you can just feel your heartbeat. Listen to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate all of your energy as we quieted our hearts today for just a moment in the hustle and bustle of our modernity. So thank you. Thank you for being on Humanity Rising. Thank you for joining this program on intentional change. I would like to now bring Joy Gilfilen on. You know her from yesterday. She has convened this 3-day session on intentional change. I know we have a very full program, Joy, a lot of juggling to do. So I want to turn the program over to you with many thanks for everything you've done to convene these sessions.
Thank you very much, Jim. I'm really thrilled today to bring on two absolutely amazing human beings that are both global citizens. Ian Lewis is going to be my co-moderator. He and I did some presentation yesterday. I'd like to introduce him in just a second to speak for a couple minutes. And then Paul Magid, who is our juggler. And so we got a mountain climber, we got a juggler, and I'd like both of them to speak for just a couple minutes. And then I'm going to come back and do a quick refresher from what we talked about yesterday to give us a context within which we can think about some of the heavier and very sensitive subjects that are going to likely come up today, so that you've got a way to be able to hear, listen, process, and take some notes so that we can have today be truly a learning experience for all of us, an adventure in learning. How can we think about very scary subjects and fear so that we can quantum leap into a different place to be productive into the future? So do you want to start, Ian, and just give just a very brief summary of who you are and why you're here, and then we'll introduce Paul, and then we'll start our program.
It's always such a lovely thing to come on here and speak with everybody, and thank you all for being here. My name's Ian Lewis. I hail from South England, just a little bit south of London. I've spent a lifetime in the outdoors as an adventurer, always in the world of education, whether that's of myself or others. And it's a lovely aspect of my life that I live in nature, and nature is me. I am never inside if I can be outside, and that's the same with every single group that I'm with. Yeah, paper and pencil doesn't cut it because it gets washed away with me, especially in English weather. So I'm here with joy this morning, looking at intention, and I want to explore areas of intention with everybody here, and I'm very interested in having Paul here because he demonstrates everything to do with the dimensions of intention: the focus, the direction, the passion, the duration, the courage, intensity, complexity, and so on. So I'm just so pleased to be with these guys here and with you all.
Thank you, Paul. You're up. You get to juggle your story.
All right, well, first, let's just start off right off the bat. I am a juggler, and I am juggling a very crowded spot, so it's hard to see. There we go. There we go. Okay, so there, I can do that. My name is Paul Magid. That's my Christian name given to me by my Sephardic Jewish parents. I'm a Sephardic Jew. My real name is Peretz David Mageed, which means he who pushes, the blessed teacher who pushes through. And I don't know how I ended up with that name. Anyway, I live here on Chimacum and Sklallam territory in very northwestern Washington on the Olympic Peninsula and the Quimper Peninsula. And I have been studying history for most of my life. I majored in English literature and in medieval Islamic history. I speak a bunch of different languages. I've had quite a career in show business with a group called the Flying Karamazov Brothers, which I'll talk about later. And I've also started a group called the New Old Time Chautauqua, based on the Chautauqua movement, which I'll also speak about later. And I live in nature as well. I was a rock climber actually when I was in my teens and early 20s, like Ian. And I am really interested in how things are actually. And so that has been sort of the thrust of my studies and scholarship. And I teach as well. And I'll talk about that as mostly about history and how we've arrived at where we are today when we look at subjugation and domination. That's me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm prepared to just start right out, and I'm sharing my screen so that you can see that the purpose of today's conversation is Paul is going to be like our pivot foot in the center of a larger conversation, which is how do we actually make a difference? How do we truly make a difference in the world today when we're facing so much conflict and so much trauma and so much fear? And it's like overwhelming, and it's really easy to go into red alert and but that's really not as useful in an emergency as if we can get into our courageous self and move forward. So the first day was revealing humanity's deep cellular betrayal. And we gave you a context of a way to think about this that I've developed over years of working on different projects. Today, Paul is going to be speaking about juggling history, language, and his experience of life to get to the point where he's able to talk about some things that are pretty difficult to talk about, and some of the actions that he's taking now to help people deal with the trauma and the pain of the past and to move into the future with different solutions. And then tomorrow we're going to bring Ian back and talk about creating powerful synergy towards energetic revitalization. And that's going to be a bigger conversation about, the oceans are in hurting, and we've got dying species, and water is one of the most, in fact, it is the essential force of life. So we're going to move it to another conversation, because if we can get into the deep cellular betrayal of humanity inside our own hearts, we can transform the little nugget that's inside our heart to move forward. So that's where we're going. Just a minute, for some reason, there. And the biggest question, Jim asked it again yesterday, and we're going to continue to ask it throughout this 3-day series. And when humans are so magnificent, why do we underperform as a species? That's been a question that I've had for years. And when I originally started, I grew up in nature, just like these guys talk about. And I knew that we were part of the entire universe. I just knew it. And most of what I was learning from cities and civilizations and all these things were very conflicted. And I spent a lot of time actually reading National Geographics, because it was the one thing I had handy. On a farm, I lived way out in the distance. And what I built over the years is a pattern of understanding that we have a body, a mind, and a spirit. That's the way we like to talk about ourselves. And there is a me, there's a we, and a we all. We are individual, we are part of a community, we are part of a planetary system, and then in fact, we're actually part of a universal system. So when we understand that these things are all moving in bioenergetic intelligence through us, we can learn to use this formula. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but when we are harmonic in our heart, and we're in vibrational integrity, and we can get in action as a unified emotional field, energy and motion field, and we focus it with deliberate intention, we can create exponential transformation. The problem comes is when some people get out of balance here, and their deliberate intention is actually not to build life-enhancing action, but to destroy. That also can take on exponential transformation. So we're going to talk about both directions that goes. And I also showed you this formula yesterday. I created a pattern for how we grow and learn, because I needed to understand when I was running for sheriff and trying to turn around the mass incarceration industry, which leads to mass decimation and mass destruction. How in the world do we face the reality of it? And how do we forgive ourselves in this lifetime for following leaders in other lifetimes that are absolutely destructive? And how do we follow systems that are hurting us? So this pattern of body, mind, spirit, we grow in a pattern of learning, and our habit is to follow leaders, even those who lead with fear. And especially when we systemize fear, it hurts us. And one of the phrases that Ian told me is, life is a daring adventure or nothing. And he'll be able to speak more on that in just a few minutes. The next model we talked about yesterday is this persecutor, victim, rescuer triangle. This is a pattern that was created quite a few in the 70s by Stephen Cartman, and he taught this as something that talks about codependency and fear. I built this model to help the teenagers that I was working with in the early 2000s, 2009. I actually started, I created a film about this, but I started the research back in the middle of the transition to 2000. And I realized that most of us talk about the body, mind, spirit as the solution to fear. And what I found is We actually have to get into a builder, leader, innovator mindset and tap into our courage, build up the energy of adventure so that we can take on the challenge of the future. It's one thing to live in the past. It's another thing to quantum leap into the future and create change. I also briefly talked about our preconditioning triangles. When we have systems that build the persecutor, victim, rescuer story into our life and into our economy and into our legal structures and into our military, we create more and more fear and more destruction. And the opposite of that is also true. If we can move over here, we can do the builder, the leader, the innovator actions to create change. So both of those is true. The problem comes again when your top leaders in your country or your top leaders in your religion or whatever field or culture you're in create degenerative predator, parasite, and profiteering systems that pull us down. I've observed that in the United States specifically, this is one of the biggest problems we're dealing with. And it's my hypothesis that it's the power, the privilege, and the prestige that we give them that allows them to continue to do it. So how do we flip that over and turn into a position where we're providing, producing, and protecting results for our families and our loved ones at heart? So here's your work. If you have handy, or if you have to do it just in your head, it works still. But if you could take out a 8.5 by 11 inch sheet of paper and just simply draw a great big tic-tac-toe diagram. And in the upper left-hand corner, you know, in that first quadrant, talk about what is tangible and what's seeable and what's real about what Paul's going to be talking about, and we're going to be talking about in this conversation. What are the things that are mental, or the dynamic things, the money games that are happening, the things that are in movement today in the world and in your reality? We're talking about the past on this left-hand column. What's already here that we're talking about that's real? And what's the spiritual, creative, or unseen things that are scaring us today? That's in the, you know, it's moving into the past because the future has yet to be seen. The center column, take notes about what are the resources now that you have available to help you make changes in the world around you relative to this subject. Or what are the resources you could imagine? Like Humanity Rising is a massive resource. The number of people that Jim has assembled here and that his team has brought forward, 800 speakers plus. I mean, this is an enormous resource, and people are spread all over the world that have knowledge today that we didn't have 20 years ago. I mean, the changes that have happened in the last 20 years, the amount of knowledge and technology and information we have to work with 800 years ago when all this other stuff happened, it wasn't there. We now know stuff that we didn't know before, and we're going to continue to learn new stuff. So write down the resources that you have accessible today in the center column. And then on the right, think about what's new and what's emerging in your community where you could make changes that take you and your friends out of the fear habit of warmongering and fearmongering and staying in the misery and moving into the future. What is evidence that things are growing? Like, who are the organizations that are standing up now? Who do you know that is moving physically, mentally, or creatively into the future? So that's the assignment. And now here comes Paul. Take it away, Paul.
Okay. Hi. So yeah, I'm Paul Magid, Paris David Mageed, and I have been studying for more than 50 years, sort of the origins of the crisis that we're in. And I believe that, which I'll show you in a moment, that you will find it very compelling and that there are solutions to getting out of this. But really what needs to happen in order for us to depart from the dominating structure we're in is for people to realize how it works. Because if you don't know how it works, you're not going to be able to escape it, because we all think in it. We're all stuck in a matrix of this place that we call the US, or in Great Britain, or wherever you may be from. There is a certain pattern of thought, which we call civilization, that is really where it's difficult to escape. It's difficult to escape your own thought patterns. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So just give me a second here. And I think it is, uh-oh, where'd it go? Too many things on my screen. I had it here seconds ago. No. Sorry, folks. Look at all those things.
Here we get to witness
Real juggling.
real juggling in real time, modern 21st century. We got technology, we got this, we got that, we got fear, and we got joy, and we got Ian, and we got Paul. So keep on going, push your buttons.
I'm going to not share any. Oh, there it is. It's right there. Okay, I got it. Tell me if it's sharing. And here we go.
It started. Yep, you're there.
All right, so I'm going to start off with sort of my career. I am a part of a group called the Flying Karamazov Brothers, and we started in 1973, nearly 50 years ago. And we started by I was in theater at the time, as well as being into history and literature, and I realized that juggling was a wonderful way of doing theater. And myself and my partner Howard began juggling obsessively, and pretty soon we began getting pretty well known, and we added a couple other people to the show. And by 1980, I graduated college in 1976, and by 1983 we were playing on Broadway. And our show is sort of a mix of a lot of silliness and patter, and also a lot of depth, and a lot of amazing juggling. We're ensemble jugglers. So anyway, that was the show there. It was called the Flying Karamazov Brothers in Juggling and Cheap Theatrics, and that was our playbill. And then we started moving into other medium. I was in a movie called Jewel of the Nile, for instance, which you may have seen. That's me with Danny DeVito. And we were shooting that in Morocco. And I am still doing this, still doing the Flying Karamazov Brothers, still appearing in movies. I was just in a movie that'll hopefully come out soon that is called Silent Retreat. And it was made just before the pandemic, and so it got stuck in the line behind all the other movies to come out. But look for that. It's actually about meditation, believe it or not, with some great stars in it.
What's the name of the movie that's coming out?
It's called Silent Retreat.
Silent Retreat. Awesome.
So anyway, I've been doing that for a very long time, and I've been touring. I've been all over the world. I also direct shows. I direct a lot of shows in Europe. I have a house in Italy, and before the pandemic was living there a fair amount. It's about a 600-year-old house. And so that's a huge aspect of my life. I also write plays, all of which have been produced in some of the finest theaters in the country. And I do another project, which is called the New Old Time Chautauqua. This is a group that I co-founded in 1981. It's part of the Great Chautauqua Movement. The Chautauqua Movement was started in 1874 in the United States, a way of mixing entertainment and education and and community, so that everybody's learning, including the people who are teaching. And there were Chautauquas that were in a single place, like the Chautauqua Institution right now in Western New York, which is the original one. And there were traveling Chautauquas. There were over 1,000 traveling Chautauquas at one point in the United States, with over 40 million people watching them and going to them, attending them, traveling the rails throughout the United States. But this is in like the teens and the 20s. By the 1930s, with the Depression and the advent of movies and radio, it had died out. And I restarted the movement as far as a traveling Chautauqua goes, and our Chautauqua, which basically goes through the greater Northwest, working in underserved communities, and working especially with Native nations, is the only traveling Chautauqua in the country. And I have been working with Native nations a lot since 1982, and work with them not only when we come as a Chautauqua, but also in sort of an activist way. This is the Chautauqua and many indigenous friends of ours from the greater Northwest and other people from our community here in Port Townsend, where I lived in Washington, out at Standing Rock during the Thanksgiving period of time in 2016. And we brought our Chautauqua kitchen there, and we're serving meals to about 500 people, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And part of also protesting and facing a lot of what we'll be talking about later. This is another project we did with the Blackfoot Confederacy in 2017 called Hands Across the Border. And it was, again, dealing with a subject we'll be talking about today, the Doctrine of Discovery, and some of the legal ramifications of that. But all that is always mixed in with being with people and working with them as co-collaborators in whatever we're doing on Chautauqua. And so and we really believe in one-on-one transformation, that people actually go and talk to people. It's not some sort of, global overreach. It's actually, you go there and you are there, and they meet with you, and we work on how to improve things in a more humane and loving way. So that's we've done our 40th year anniversary, and we're going to be touring again starting hopefully this summer. The other thing that Chautauqua has done as far as tangible results is we did a collaboration with Washington State Parks and the local Native nations in Washington State. And it was called Native Voices in Washington State Parks. And what the Chautauqua basically did was bring Native indigenous people into the parks that are on their territories and have them become co-stewards with the rangers, who often didn't know much about whose land they were on, and also gave them the rights to gather in those parks, to gather and forage in the parks, and to make decisions about the parks and become part of the land that had been taken from them. And that is an ongoing project in the state of Washington. So we're going to get into the history here. So I'm just going to give you a very brief thing of what I basically work on, which is, it's called my class is called the Complete Doctrine of Discovery. And you can register if you want to learn about it for a class that starts January 11th. It's 5 classes in 5 weeks, 2 hours each from 5 to 7 o'clock on West Coast time. And basically we're talking about what is the legal structure and how it was built that we are in today, that allows for allowed for colonization, domination, and destruction of cultures throughout the world.
Oh, could you step back? That other slide was really useful. Could you just back up for a second? Just get us a glimpse so we can just absorb it. You don't have to talk about it. The one that showed the triangles.
Okay, but okay.
And then go forward.
That I was going to get to that one.
Okay, that's fine. I just love that slide because it's so clear. Do it twice. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So this is a quick timeline of Homo sapien development. We started off in Africa, as most people know, and then spread from Africa throughout the globe, all in practically everywhere, especially after the Ice Age. But way before the Ice Age as well, there were civilizations in Eurasia, in Australia, who've been there for 40 or 50,000 years. And so I'm just going to give you a quick summation. We were living in small groups, and even when we started farming, we were living in small egalitarian partnership associations generally. Nothing is ever perfect, but in generally before the beginning of what we call civilization, people were and had to be in partnership because Homo sapiens superpower is learning. That is what is something that we have that no other beings have. Learning in, not that other beings don't learn, that, but we have it in such a way that we can abstract the information and transform things almost magically. And we just take it for granted that we can do that. And people learned from one another, and they learned quickly and fast. What happened, though, was that mass agriculture began. And not first, it started off as small societies, and then it got into bigger societies, and finally got to the first city-states, which was starting in Sumer in Mesopotamia about 6,000 years ago. And we started coming up with city-states. And I'll go back to that slide I was at before. I'm just going to do this very quickly. Society became stratified because there was a surplus of food and resources, and there was the beginnings of what's called ownership, and people had owned land and some people didn't, and suddenly learning became the place that only was only for the high priests, the nobles, the officials, and the scribes, and then basically people below them were stuck in their positions of work. So there's Sumer, and then there were many empires, hegemonic empires, the Assyrians, Babylonians, the Persians. I'm just giving you guys a quick overview of this. Somewhere in there, about 4,000 years ago, the Jews were born, and it's important in this story to know about this. Abraham left the city of Ur, which was a city-state, and began believing in this God called Yahweh. And I won't go into all the stories of that, but by the time Rome came about, there was a small state called Israel. And the Romans, what's interesting about them is that, of course, there was the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire was run, even though it was eventually not a republic anymore, but an empire, was run on a set of laws. Laws had begun to come into effect during the first ones we know about that were written down was the Hammurabi's Code, which happened in about 1250 BCE. And what's interesting about a law is, as I teach in my class, is that it's kind of like a magic spell. And it's a bunch of words written down, put in a certain form, and then handed off to people who you don't know, and can be distributed throughout an entire country or empire. And other people who have arms and weapons will enforce it and might kill people who don't follow it. And laws are these magic spells, and the genius of Rome, and also, of course, the sadness of Rome was that these laws were promulgated through the entire empire, and we live, our code of justice is largely based on the law of Rome. Rome had taken over the state of Israel in 63 BCE, and the Jews were under this heavy oppression. And this guy was born Yeshua, who is known as Jesus. He was a Jewish guy who was Jewish the day he was born and Jewish the day he died. He claimed himself to be a Messiah. There were many messiahs, or Meshiachs, as we say in Hebrew. And during that time, there were more people who claimed to be the Meshiach. And the Meshiach has a certain, which I won't show you the slide, but there are certain things that they have to do in the Jewish tradition, most of which Yeshua never accomplished. However, he was condemned as a rebel and crucified in a most hideous way. And he had a bunch of followers who you know as the apostles. And they were all Jewish people and thought of themselves as Jews. And then this guy came along, Saul of Tarsus, who is also known as St. Paul, and implanted what I call the Bible, which is kind of what we're living in today, which I'll explain later. But basically, he implants the virus of intolerance, and I'll kind of go into that. There, all these things Paul innovated as far as what he thought Christianity was, the belief in Christ, which is a Greek word for the anointed one. And I won't read all of these, but the main one was, one of the main ones was that Yeshua was a God incarnate. No Jew would ever believe that, ever, including Yeshua himself. None of these things would Yeshua have followed because he was Jewish. That other people other than Jews could be followers of a Jewish person, no Jew would ever believe. The main one was that the only way to get to eternal life was through Jesus, and that in fact this life was not what was important. Was life after death, and that was certainly nothing that Yeshua would ever have believed, because Jews believe that your daily life is what's important. How you conduct yourself today and in the now is what's important, not the hereafter. We do have a heaven. We don't really have a hell. And anyway, this idea of that, it's my way or the highway, basically. Either you believe in me and me as in my godship, and my God as a God incarnate, and through that you can reach heaven, or you're condemned to hell. So we're skipping quickly through here. There was an emperor 300 years later named Constantine, who through many bloody wars became the emperor of the entire Roman Empire, where it had been divided into a tetrarch, into 4 different spheres, guided by other Caesars and Augustuses. We won't get into that. But anyway, once he took over the empire, he had, and in one of his battles, he had a vision of seeing a cross in the sky. But really what happened was that he had this incredible idea. And it's important, and I'll take a minute here to talk about this. He was a bloody megalomaniac, but he had this incredible idea, which we all live with right now, was that by putting together the empire with a religion that is intolerant, that is there and is sanctioned by the empire as the only religion, you could have complete and total control. And that is what happened. He had a council called the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE in Nicaea, and he gathered all the bishops and deacons of the early church, who all had very different ideas. I won't get into all of that, but basically came up with the Nicene Creed, which most churches repeat as written by Constantine, changed in 381 slightly. But he invented the Catholic Church. In fact, that's what he called it, the Catholic and Apostolic Church. And that institution lives on today almost exactly as created. And it began thousands of years of slowly and surely domination. So most of Europe was converted over a long period of time, especially when from the top down, when people were who were pagans, the Germanic people in Western and Northern Europe, realized the elites of those societies realized that Christianity was an incredible way to maintain control. And so we get to the kings and queens of Europe. Now we're going to get to the actual doctrine of discovery. And so in 1444, Henry the Navigator, who was a relative, obviously, of the King of Portugal, who is Alfonso V, had sent ships off to Africa and realized that there was a lot of money to be made in the slave trade. So he told the king that he should write a letter to Nicholas V, who was the Pope at the time, to get a religious justification for invading northwestern Africa, taking over the slave trade, and justification for the enslavement of the people that were being, are to be enslaved by mostly Arab traders, but a religious, racial justification for their enslavement. And so the Pope, who was also under pressure because of the Islam had been born in 610, and much of Western Europe was being very much threatened by Islamic invasions, including those that happened in Iberia and Spain, came up with this thing called Dum Diversas, which is the first legal document promulgated by the Catholic Church, which is still legal today, still stands today as written. And I'll read it to you. Joy wanted me to read it to you. We weighing all in singular the premises with due meditation, and noting that since we had formerly by other letters of ours granted, among other things, free and ample faculty to the aforesaid King Alfonso to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens. Saracens are people of the Islamic faith, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ, wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods held and possessed by them, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. And by having secured the said faculty, the said King Alfonso, or by his authority, the aforesaid Infante, justly and lawfully has acquired and possessed and doth possess these islands, lands, harbors, seas, and they do of right belong and pertain to the said King Alfonso and his successors. So that is the first promulgation of a legal justification for land seizure, for slavery, and basically the first racist text began to be written with the simple basic idea being that better to be a slave and Christian than to be a heathen and free. That was the idea. And that you also, because of the blood cleanliness laws that were happening in Portugal and Spain at the time, which then spread to all throughout Europe, which meant that there were in Spain at the time many Jews who lived there, my family amongst them, and it was believed, because of John 8:44, amongst other things in the New Testament, that Jews were the children of the devil. And in fact, quite literally so, physically so. And so their blood was tainted. And therefore, if you were a old Christian, many Jews converted to save their lives and not to have to leave Spain. And those were called new Christians, and old Christians were people who'd been Christians for many, many years. And but in order to marry somebody or to get a job in the government, you had to prove that you were an old Christian because you didn't want to have tainted blood. And this idea of race, which is a modern idea, which lives on today so heavily in our society, was really born in a legal way. It is during this period of time. So in 1492, Spain threw out the last Moorish kingdom that was in Iberia in January, expelled the Jews, an edict of expulsion in late March. They had to all be out by August the 2nd. On August the 2nd, coincidentally, this guy Columbus, who had come from Italy with an idea to go west to find the Spice Islands in the Indies, in India, where the Portuguese had already been, sailed west and in fact landed on islands of Turtle Island, and did what became to be known as the act of discovery. So when you discovered something under the doctrine of discovery, it wasn't that you didn't necessarily know it was there. You were discovering it for your monarch, because there were no Christian people who were inhabiting the area. There were people inhabiting the area, but since they were Christians, since they were not Christians, it then became the land of the monarch who discovered the land. So this thing that Christopher Columbus did right here, where he put the flag of the monarch, had held the sword of justice, and there was a priest, as you can see behind him, with the book, with the Bible, and he said the mumbo jumbo, and suddenly that land was transformed. And legally, what it's called is, as soon as you say the mumbo jumbo and becomes the land of whoever the monarch is, it's the land becomes terra nullius. This is the legal word for it, as though nobody lived there. And suddenly all title and sovereignty became that of the monarch. And so Columbus, as we know, it's had he had 4 journeys. He was responsible for the murder of many thousands of Native Americans on these islands, and thus began colonization. And I mean, this is a quick journey through all of this, so I won't go into the entirety of colonization, but let's just say that after the British did their part and took over what we call now the United States and Canada, there was the Revolutionary War, and all of this was built on the precedent of the Doctrine of Discovery, that land and title belong to a Christian civilization. And so once the Brits were kicked out, sorry, Ian, were kicked out of the United States, there was confusion about who owned the land. Before, while the Brits were there, it was all called crown land. Now there wasn't a monarch in the United States who owned the land. And a big decision happened in 1823, which was called Johnson versus McIntosh, 1823. And what happened was that some guy bought land from a Native American person, and another guy after the Revolutionary War said, you can't buy land. Indians can't own land because of the Doctrine of Discovery. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruling came out in favor of the guy who said that all land is federal land, and what it also said that Indians who were savages, heathens, couldn't own land. They only had the right of occupation, and they were wards of the state forever.
Could you
And
restate Paul?
That ruling.
Could you restate
Yes.
that sentence? Because there was a sound glitch when you were talking that I'd like you to restate what that was. Savage's comment.
Oh, so in the ruling written in 1823 by the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall, it enshrined the precedent of the Doctrine of Discovery that was given by Great Britain, given by the popes, and said that, in fact, Indians who were savages and heathens had no right to the land. The title had changed from them to the monarch, and now from the monarch to the United States federal government. All land was federal government, and Indians only had the right of occupation, and they were wards of the state. So right after that was formed the BIA. It wasn't called that initially, but it later became the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And they knew now what to do. They had a law, they had a rule, they were going to enforce it. So first they removed Indians from their land and sent them west, which is called the Trail of Tears. Many native nations that lived on the East Coast were moved way far west. And then they came up with the idea of later on of reservations when they realized that they were going to take over the entire continent of the United States and they weren't going to be able to exterminate them or move them west anymore. And the reservations were started, and we live with these laws today. This is the actual ruling that stands in the United States, and basically is what's important about this ruling is it gives the legitimacy of the United States and in Canada. And it also, the importance of the Doctrine of Discovery, every place that was colonized or under the sphere of influence of Great Britain or France or Russia or Germany or Portugal, all were based legally on the Doctrine of Discovery. That's why this is so important, because it's still the basis for the legitimacy of Australia, the United States, of Canada, New Zealand, of many countries. And it was also used against India when there was the Raj of the British government in India, in China when the British government was running China, of Indonesia when the Dutch were running Indonesia, and Vietnam, Southeast Asia when the French were running that area, all based on this Doctrine of Discovery. So what this did was it then gave them the idea that the devil was basically, the Indians weren't really full human beings because they weren't Christian. And so they came up with this idea the saying was, kill the Indian, save the man. And in America and in Canada and in Australia, we came up with boarding schools, and they would kidnap Indian children from their families and bring them to these schools and cut their hair and make them speak English and beat them savagely if they didn't, and try to turn them into servants and domestics. And these were run by churches all over the United States. So they're the Presbyterians, the Catholics, the Congregationalists, Quakers, just about every denomination was in the game, because you also got paid money for each Indian child. Now, as far as they can tell, because they're doing research in Canada about this, about 40% of the children died in these schools during this period of time, which lasted many, many years, many generations, 3 or 4 generations of Native Americans. And there are mass graves practically at every one of these schools that existed. And this is all under the Doctrine of Discovery, right? This is this idea that basically, even if you were converted to Christianity, if you weren't a white Christian person, you could not ever be in the top parts of society. You were always going to be based in a small capacity, and you could only learn so much. So I teach a much bigger version of this, and you can go to my website called doctrineofdiscovery.net if you want to register and actually learn about this in depth. But we are living with this today. This is what is driving our politics in almost every country. And people have to really understand where it comes from in order for us to transform out of it, because there are some really dangerous, non-human ideas that are based in the Doctrine of Discovery, or I should say where the Doctrine of Discovery comes from. And I think there are great ways for us to get out of it. And I think a lot of it is looking at how human society were based, not when they weren't civilized. Civilization to me is not a great word. And I think that we need to look at how humans are hardwired and to live in smaller communities with people whom they know. And humans also are hardwired to travel. And meet with other communities, just like a root system in a forest. So I have hope. I have great hope for human beings. I'm hoping everybody will learn how to juggle. So that's sort of the basic thrust of what I teach. So we can open it up from there, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Paul. This was such a terrific summary of, I took your courses, your first series of courses, and learned so much. And what I saw were these patterns of human behavior, because the literal following of laws, it's difficult for most people to even think about it, let alone reconcile the differences. Because one of the things that you and I talked about in the beginning was, what are the things that are so challenging for us to even be able to hear the conversation? Because there's words and there's perception of history and diversity of societies and all these different things. And so accuracy, so I want to bridge this to Ian for a second, because your recounting of the story is, of course, your perception based upon your own study, based upon living in all these different countries, based upon your history. And so you have a way of seeing. That's incredibly useful. And I love taking your class, because it really helped me personally to tear apart all these stories and prejudices and opinions that were driving my family, my history, my jobs, my work, all these things. So Ian, do you want to speak about the power of intention and that front load when you are talking about adventure and moving off into things, and how important accuracy in understanding what's going on right now? You have to take yourself off mute, Ian. It's important. and if we could share, all of us, a little bit right now, so that we open this as a panel discussion, I think that would be useful for the screen. So go for it, Ian.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, Paul. You've got a tremendous understanding of all this. And there's lots of discussions on it. But the one thing for sure is that it isn't rescinded and it still exists. It's really interesting to me to relate that to a few thousand years earlier, where the Romans trod across Britain with its 4,000 Belgic tribes and just walked over the old Druid tribespeople. And of course, there's plenty of examples of other things happening across the world, even now, I would say. But I want to stay on the focus of intention. And I want to introduce the idea that we actually have an intention muscle to begin with. Now, so with any muscle, absolutely, it's a great example. Actually, you try and get your muscles working towards juggling. I've tried many times, and it's always lasted about 3 minutes. So, the intention muscle is a muscle like meditation. It needs to be identified and exercised and worked with. It grows stronger, it grows faster, it grows more enduring, and so on. Now, just the concept of the intention is part of what I call the nous sphere. The nous being wisdom from Old Greek, and sphere simply meaning around wisdom. And we now, in American and English, exactly so. Good things come in little round balls. The sphere that we're talking here, like noosphere, like hemisphere, like the biosphere, it needs extra words to make it clear. And for me, I am quite sure that if we took intention to bits, we would find areas like passion, like focus, like direction, like purpose, and so on. And all of these can become stronger and stronger. What I want to explore just for a second is that as someone builds intention, so the energy centers and it's drawn into a place which makes someone stronger, more courageous, less fearful, and they're able to step into places where I think they would say fools fear to tread, but that's not quite true. What I want to do, just for a second, I think, is just quickly share a slide to give an example of this. Single slide, and we share on here, and we share screen 2, and we go to main show. So Joy mentioned that one of the attributes of effective intention is an accurate perception of reality. And the subdomains that have been written about this in something called the Further Reaches of Human Nature is a realistic orientation, perceives reality accurately. And Paul, you're a great example of that. You have done the research to really get down to it, and you're accurately judging it. Now, further down here, we have some really strong words about intention, a high degree of discrimination ability, contact between inner and outer self. That is so much into our Humanity Rising agenda. Unthreatened by disorder, little need for order. It doesn't matter how many regulations there are, how much evidence to the contrary there is. It is not threatening to someone who has great personal discrimination.
Stop for a second, Ian. I just want to point out that the Chautauqua show, now that is chaos.
That
to many
is.
people, scares the heck out of people. But Paul, you do it good. You do it well, and I'm so pleased to have you here. You can handle all this chaos. Keep going. Sorry, Ian.
It's really an important thing to say. For me, this idea of chaos is a bad word and order is a good word, that is such rubbish. Where we get true creativity, we are into that area where people are not threatened as to whether it's orderful or disorderful. They are absolutely happy to be there because something different is happening. And that is all part of this now sphere, understanding broader areas that are not based on old, threatening superstitions and cultural developments and so on. Humanity has somewhere else to go. Safety, relatively unthreatened due to accurate perceptions. Again, it relates to the first one, but actually people can get a lot closer to the edge before they're actually in danger. And we are getting situations today where the parents were told don't go near the edge, and now the children are being told don't go near the edge of the edge. So that brings back to a pullover or a sweater is something the parent wears, the child wears because the parent feels cold. So too is risk. Risk is something the child feels because the parent doesn't feel safe. Now, we're still able to operate despite an existing and present threat or fear. Now, that is an important aspect of our ability to direct intention. It brings us into that place where, because of uncertainty, a lot of truths are never spoken. Now, if you just think about that, Paul is speaking a great truth here, and there is a huge humanity disruption because people are not speaking the wider truths, and many, many more people are actually defending inappropriate truths. And if I were to just look at the climate environment, I would certainly be saying that it was terrifically frightening to go to Glasgow with COP26 and find almost as many carbon energy freaks out there as there were representatives of everything else combined. Now that is a disturbed humanity. So in summary, all I am saying is we need to exercise our intention muscle, become braver, more confident, accept uncertainty, and know that it's perfectly normal to exist in that place if we're really going to hold intention and do great things.
Well, I very much agree. I mean, that's kind of what juggling's all about, actually. You know, it's the defying of gravity. You know, in the end, things are going to fall apart, but that shouldn't stop you from doing what we call real magic. You actually, everything you're about to see is actually happening, right? You know, when you're juggling, it's magical, but it's for real. And that's sort of the main thrust of my life, I think, is actually making things real, but magic. And, you know, the things that are going on in the world today, you know, are based around extraction and exploitation. And we are destroying our diversity. You know, we're getting less and less balls to juggle, if you want to use that metaphor. Every day we are destroying animals that are going extinct, plants, ourselves, many languages. I mean, I didn't speak about language, and that's part of what this talk is about. I mean, language is so important. The very, you know, the part of one of the things that drives the doctrine of discovery and drives the legalization of fear-based societies based on top-down government is language itself. Like I was talking about laws being written in such a way that somebody with a gun will come and do something about you, even though they don't know you and they don't know the guy who made the law. And not only that, but language itself in the books that are written by, you know, like what is called scripture. Well, I mean, we didn't get into the fact that, for instance, what's called the New Testament was written in Greek when Yeshua himself only spoke Aramaic. So being someone who speaks a number of languages, I speak a lot of Romance languages in Hebrew, making translations are really difficult, and they don't generally convey what the person was actually trying to say because it's such an intimate thing, language. And the English language is right now, as they say, the lingua franca of the world, which I find a funny joke. And it is a wonderful language. It's got more words than almost any other language in the world. But on the other hand, it is not a substitute for a language from a place. So like here in the United States, we have over 700 Native American languages, different languages. Most of them are going to be extinct in the next 5 to 10 years. Extinct in the sense that there won't be anybody who actually speaks them. There will be traces of them, and some of them have been studied, and a lot of them are trying to be revitalized, but they're going extinct. And this is not just happening in the United States, it's happening all over the world. And there's a reason for that. And part of it is what I'm talking about is the culture of domination. And a lot of that comes from this doctrine of discovery, and which another thing I need to point out is there are many indigenous people who have gone to the Pope Francis over every year to ask him to rescind the doctrine of discovery, the papal bulls that were promulgated in the 15th century, and he has yet to do that. And part of it is that, as another thing I'd like to point out is that in the United States, we had a court case in 2005. It was the city of Sherrill against the Oneida Nation, who was trying to buy back land. They were one of the Indians that were removed. Remember when mentioned removal, and they were moved out to Minnesota and Wisconsin. They were trying to buy land back where they're from, which is in Western New York, but they didn't want to pay state taxes, right? And anyway, the Doctrine of Discovery and its enshrinement in U.S. law came up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided in against the Indians with the opinion written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg that you basically can't open that can of worms because it calls into question the legitimacy of the United States. So it's a very deep thing. And when you think about property and what you own and who, you know, and money, all that stuff is all based around a lot of old things that really keep us down. And we need to get unstuck. We need to look at the ways many different people have lived on this planet for a very long time. I bring up in my class, like where I live right now here in the Pacific Northwest, there were societies that have been around, and scientists know this for a fact now, for 14 to 15,000 years, the same people in the same place for a really long time. Incredibly successful societies. There's no societies I know of that are that successful. And yet when the people who armed with the Doctrine of Discovery and guns and ships came, they destroyed those societies in a matter of a few hundred, 50 years, 100 years. And we need to look at these different societies that exist all around the world in so much, in such diverse ways, and try not to think in the ways that we have been taught to think, but that's part of the thing, I think, Ian, as far as intention goes. You have to also realize where the edges of your thought can go, because if you don't know that, then you're going to be stuck in your head all the time. And you have to have the intention of exploring your thought patterns and where they come from and how you got there and what does that mean in the end. And that goes for everything. Like, how do you buy food? How do you get food? Do you own property? How do you own that property? Whose land are you on? There's just many different ways of thinking that are actually really exciting, I think.
So let me make a bridge here, because I'm reading some of the conversations in the chat, and I'm listening to this, and I realize a lot of the confusion that I had to go through in unraveling a lot of my prejudgments, my prejudices that I never even questioned my prejudices, right? Until I started really looking at the problems we had with the mass incarceration industry and the growth of the prison industrial complex. As I said yesterday somewhere, that during one period of time in California, we built one school or one college while we were building 22 prisons. So the ripple effect, the long-term ripple effect over time of something that happened 200, 400, 600, 800 years ago, if the authority of the law or the person who could control power or who could kill people was used as the fear and domination tool, regardless of what they said. I mean, even if that dude died 50 years later, it didn't matter, because how many of you guys have done that thing where you put a cup up to your ear and you have 20 kids in the room and you pass the story from one story to another and you get around the circle, and all of a sudden down here the story is totally different from the beginning. We have to recognize that this is happening over tens of thousands of years, and then 500 years, and then 100 years, to the point that on January 6th, we had a riot in Washington, D.C. And people are now questioning who's telling the truth. But the thing that's interesting, I watched the entire, this last couple of years, as we were going through all these constitutional laws and who's the truth and who should have this, the argument over the letter of the law is the whole point. And yet, if the letter of the law, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is correct, and she was afraid to probably touch base on this, because what's it going to do? So the fear of what's going to happen if we get away from the letter of the law and we go back to the law of the heart and the law of intention and the law of probability and the future, because the future is codependent on where we are right now and the decisions we make right now. It's not codependent on the church or anybody else. So how are we going to help people navigate from the pattern of fear and the pattern of being afraid of the military and the pattern of being afraid of the law to getting to the point of transformation? So that's what we have to go to. Like, how are we going to navigate all of those realities? Because the reality is there that this issue is before the Supreme Court. And the United States is a leader in domination in the world. We're a leader in incarceration in the world. We're a leader in war. And frankly, the number of kids and the people around me in Washington State, I'm not even talking about the South. I'm talking about the number of people who are now buying guns because they're afraid of civil war, or civic war is what I'm calling it, all over religion and laws and QAnon and the mythology. It's really pretty, it's frankly worth looking at, not with fear, but what are we going to do about it that's courageous and active based, that is not about violence?
I think that what's going on right now is very much something about religion. It's certainly, and it's about the Christian religion in this country. And that needs to be looked at very deeply. And that, I think, is the only way to get people to, you can talk about love all you want. And I think that is ultimately the answer. But if you don't know, if you can't juggle the rest of it, it's all going to fall apart. If you want to use that metaphor. And you really need to know where it comes from. You need to know why these laws exist. These are the laws by which guys with guns can come and arrest you, or say you have to leave your property, or keep you on a reservation. I mean, reservations are the oldest refugee camps in the world, right? They've been around for 150 years. They're incarcerating Native Americans, keeping them in poverty and in bad situations. I mean, I could go on for hours about it, and I do.
Yes, you do.
But you have to know these things in order to get to the love thing. You have to know where you are. You have to know where you've come from in order to walk where you are now and to go somewhere different in the future. And
so I'd like to spin back to Ian for just a few seconds on this idea of not, how you said it was, you don't shoot a rocket ship out of a swamp or something. And then I want to bring Jim back into the conversation, because I just looked at the clock and we're running a little bit short on time here. But Ian, can you wrap this conversation up a little bit inside this swamp and, the rock in the middle of the road type? This is reality.
I love the parameters. Okay, swamps and rocket ships. Let's do this. Let's take this to some solid ground, shall we?
Thank you, Paul.
The metaphor actually comes from the idea that before you can create something solid and move forward with it, it's really helpful to be standing on solid ground. Now, there's lots of examples of this. You could be standing on the shoulders of great people from the past. You could get your facts straight. You could isolate information, do all sorts of things. But the most important thing, as far as intention is concerned, it is having a great grasp of reality and being able to make judgments within it. Now, there's something called affective and effective, and you can't be effective without getting your affective sorted out. And this is where you can strengthen your affective. It's heart. Affective is from within. You can push all sorts of things forward from that affective place. The interesting thing for me is that a rocket ship doesn't launch from a swamp. It needs a launch pad. And one of the nicest things about intention, if you're doing it playing the long game, you're going to find all the information you need. You're going to build yourself up. You're going to find people who support. You're going to draw in the energy from all the sources that they come, and you're going to move forward with that. And of course, we've got this beautiful situation now where we've got great communication systems which allow for something different there. And it's suffice to say, the risk isn't that we are shouting or moving or doing things in this way, the risk is that we're not doing that enough.
And being able to recognize that when you got a rock in the road, like we had that conversation, Paul, yesterday about, you can pretend the rock isn't there, but if the rock is there, the rock's there, and you can run all you want, but you got to figure out the reality is it's there. And so we do have a reality that laws have been based on the ability of and the authority of militaries or groups to be able to kill indiscriminately and be authorized to do it. And when we did that, that's even affected our stock market. Please do come on, Jim. But that's even affected our stock market. I mean, when I started studying money and how in the world we got way off course, I started studying stock options trading, because when we came commercial and technologically able to independently do stock options trading, I suddenly found out that if I was smart, I could make 4,000% growth in a stock by trading stock options because a company was going to die. I mean, my God, I could make money on the death of companies. And I didn't know that until I studied the stock market. And I went, what in the world do we have? What are we doing in our systems and our technology and our systems to allow us to profit and do well on the death of others? That's screwed up, frankly. And so the power of intention, see, but I'm not afraid of that. I'm only afraid that I didn't know it before. The power of intention is to say, now I know it. Now I can face it. There's that rock in the middle of the road. We do have a problem with religions and with cultures and with institutions and with banks. So what are we going to do about it? That's the question. So I'm really enthused by this conversation. You did an extraordinary job today, Paul, but let's turn it over to Jim and see if you have a question or two for us before you have to close it in some timely manner. So go for it, Jim. Hand it over to you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ian. Appreciated the presentation. What strikes me is that there are deeper layers to what you're talking about, and I'd like to unpack a few of those layers because I think we end up in a different place. I think it's very important to acknowledge what Paul is saying about the doctrine of discovery. But in my view, it is just a local example of a much deeper cultural malaise that we haven't touched on here. And if we're going to raise the issue, I think we have to go deeper. I think it's very important to bear in mind that Christianity came out of Judaism. And if you go to the Torah, in the Torah, God commands the Israelites to go into Canaan and kill every man, woman, and child. It's worth noting that within a generation of receiving the 10 Commandments, the Israelites were in Canaan committing genocide. And so I would say that the doctrine of discovery is rooted in Torah.
I disagree completely.
You may, but I want to broaden this here. Because what the Christians have done is heinous, but is rooted. And if you look into the origin of the Israelites, they come out of Mesopotamia. Every single one of the Mesopotamian civilizations did the same thing. If you look at the Assyrians, for example,
Yes.
the Assyrians were masters at the relocation, the mass relocation of peoples. And that's one reason why the 10 northern tribes of Israel disappeared, because they were conquered by the Assyrians and essentially wiped out. And the Assyrians did that all over the Fertile Crescent. If you look to the east, you look in India, you look in China, wherever you have agricultural societies with land, with cities, with farming, you have war, you have conquest, You have slaves. So I think it's very important, everyone, to fully own the doctrine of discovery and to also understand that it is rooted in a human condition that we haven't touched on yet here. And unless we're going to, unless we really go deeply into the existential issues of how humans develop these capacities, and what we're finding out about the upper primates, the large mammals, is they're territorial, they're ferociously aggressive with one another, they are rigidly hierarchical for the most part. And so the anthropology of aggression, the anthropology of conquest, the anthropology of the religious sanction on the politics of conquest needs to be understood not as a Christian phenomenon, not as the doctrine of discovery. What we have done here is simply what others have done virtually everywhere. You can even go into Africa. Look at King Shaka of the Zulus. He was one of the most ruthless conquerors in sort of modern African history. Look at the Aztecs. Look at the Incas. These were all political, hierarchical political structures that, in the case of the Aztecs, demanded, thousands of human sacrifices on a regular basis to satiate the gods, and that if they stopped the human sacrifice, the Aztec Empire would fall. So the interrelationship between what you're saying, Paul, and the Abrahamic religions generally, the way religions have been used by political elites historically and globally. Look at what the Chinese just did with the Tibetans just 50 years ago. They went in and they completely devastated a culture. So this really important. We have to own the doctrine of discovery, but the doctrine of discovery is just a rubber stamp on a mentality that is inherent in civilization itself.
Okay. Can I have a word, please?
Yeah. And Paul,
Yes.
Paul, I want to give you full time to be able to answer this, because this is one of the big issues that we've talked about. So I want to ask you to breathe. It's okay. We're all great, because this is the question that we have to talk about. And Jim, is it okay if we take another 10 minutes?
Yeah, let's take a little bit more time, but we've opened up a big issue.
Yeah,
and we should honor the complexity of the issue.
totally.
So that we don't get into thinking that the doctrine of discovery is any more important than it needs to be within the larger framework of an issue that we humans need to sort through, and we haven't touched on.
Yeah, let Paul touch on it, because I think that's important. And I want Ian afterwards to touch on it, and me too, because I think this is exactly what we need to talk about. Go for it,
A
Paul.
book that came out November 9th called The Dawn of Everything. I would suggest everybody read it. You are looking at things from a Western point of view. Everything's the same. All humans are killing each other. That is not the case. When you look at archaeology and anthropology, most human societies are not based on that. Most human societies are based on working together in smaller groups and have been living all over the planet in those kinds of societies. Yes, there have been hegemonic empires in all kinds of parts of the world. There has never been anything like what we're talking about right now. Who colonized the world? It wasn't the Chinese. It wasn't the Incas. It wasn't anybody else but Western Europe who colonized the world. And how did they do it? They used legal justifications to do things that are inhumane, because they looked at other people as inferiors. And to use Judaism as the model is, I'm sorry, that feels anti-Semitic to me, and it really hurts me to hear about it. Yes, there was the story that happened in Canaan absolutely is in the Torah. But did the Jews take over the rest of the world? No, it's a tribe. Yes, there have been tribal conflicts all over the world for many, many years. And yes, there has been violence in the world. Absolutely. And there's violence that happened here in North America on Turtle Island. Absolutely. But there's never been anything like what we're experiencing right now. Look what's happening in America right now. Who is causing, all of these problems? It's not the Jews. It's not Black people. It's not Native Americans. It's white Christian nationalists with guns. So you can't tell me that it's all the same, that every empire is the same, that people are violent by nature. I would say they are not violent by nature. I think people are really good by nature. That not, you don't have to have a surplus of agriculture. I'm sorry to say, you don't. If you have a surplus of agriculture, it doesn't mean that you're going to become a violent empire. The surpluses of agriculture happening in Turtle Island. Look at the great cultures that happened on the Mississippi River, or the Iroquois Confederacy. Or there's so many examples of so many people living together in basic harmony. Maybe not the way we would think of harmony, but the way they thought of harmony. And they treated the earth as a part of them. They were part of it. They didn't own it. They were part of it. Part of what the problem with the Doctrine of Discovery is based on Roman law, which is based on ownership of a person, a pater familias. The name familia is actually, about ownership. It is, you cannot tell me that it is the same for everybody. I just completely disagree with what you're saying. I would say that human beings, for the most part, live in societies that are based on egalitarian partnerships. And that's the sweet spot for humans. That's where we learn the most and learn the fastest. That's where our intentions are fully realized for the most part. They are not based, it's not all the same. That is a Western way of looking at things. I'm sorry. I'm not born in a Western world. I was born in my Sephardic Spanish Jewish world, and we live in terror of Christians, okay? We live in terror. They've been chasing my family for 2,000 years. They've killed my father's side of the family, was completely extinguished in the Holocaust. So you can't tell me that didn't come from somewhere. There's nobody who's ever done anything like that on that level, ever. So yes, I believe there is something very dangerous. What Christianity has done, especially to Europeans, is cut off their roots of where they're from. That's what it does. It cuts off the root of where you live, the earth, the Druids, the shamans that lived in Europe at that time were all killed and murdered. Why? Because it is an almost cancer of a religion, right? It does not recognize, it is a part of state power. It was made by Constantine to be state, power of the state.
And I just have to say, just as respectfully as I possibly can, to single out the Christian religion as a culprit in light of the Jewish experience in conquering Palestine, the Muslim experience in conquering India to Spain, the Chinese experience in conquering Korea to Vietnam, is ahistorical, Paul. I want to be clear on 2 points. 2 points. One, what you're saying about what the Christians have done is absolutely true. What we need to recognize is that it was done by conquering people worldwide and over history since the beginning of civilization, about 5,000-6,000 years ago, depending on when you want to calibrate these things. So we're not talking about a Christian phenomenon. We're talking about an existential human frailty in relationship to power, in relationship to need, that I think needs to be much more deeply explored. The second point that I would make is that if you look at indigenous societies in North America, Turtle Island, they were certainly more aligned with the natural processes, but they were in perpetual war amongst themselves at levels that, if you look into the historical record, are quite staggering. So we shouldn't be romanticizing indigenous peoples as somehow benign, romantically idealized, and was sort of without human blemish. It just simply, that's not the historical record. And the scalping, the cruelties of the native tribes was at the same level of barbarism, but not in scope. And you're absolutely right that in the last 4 or 5 centuries, the Western powers, largely through the development of technology, were able to go around the world and colonize the rest of the world. But it's a difference, and this is important. It's a difference in degree. It's not a difference in kind. And because it's not a difference in kind, Joy, we've got to go much deeper into the existential underpinnings of civilization itself. And to make one more point, I would refer everybody to Freud's Civilization and Its Discontents, written just before he died. When he was, as an old man, having studied the human psyche all his life, he couldn't get around this issue of why humans are so cruel to one another. And he wrote Civilization and Its Discontents, and I won't go into it right now, but it's the kind of existential exploration of how societies coercively regulate aggression that I think is very important for us to go on. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this, everyone, if we just stay at the level, it's the Christians, we're not going to get to the deeper strata of what we as a human species needs to grapple with at this moment when we're going off the cliff, because worldwide, there's not a government on planet Earth right now of any religion that's actually doing what they need to do in the face of Code Red. So this is not a matter of one religion doing a lot of bad things to people in an otherwise benign environment. That is ahistorical, and it doesn't get us to the pathway of the kind of self-examination that we really need to have in an urgent way at this time.
Jim,
So
were you raised in your household? Were
yeah,
you
can I?
raised in America? I think you were probably. You're thinking like an American. I'm not saying that there wasn't
So
violence.
I'm not thinking like an American. I wasn't even born in this country. I've spent most of my life outside the United States. So please, Paul, let's not engage in kind of ad hominem violence to me like you're doing against the Christian religion. It's not appropriate.
I feel as though you're doing that with what I'm thinking and saying. And I really feel that modern racism as we know it, slavery, commercial slavery, didn't happen until the Western powers invented it.
No, that's just simply not true. The Greeks, the Indians, the Arabs were selling slaves from time immemorial.
No, Jim, there was slavery, but that's not the same as saying somebody's inferior by nature because of their religion.
That's a more modern phenomenon, but the issue of slavery is ubiquitous.
Ian, go for it. Ian.
I mean, we
I-
gotta, if we're gonna, Humanity Rising, we try to stay at least grounded in reality here. So I'm trying to ground us in some kind of reality.
Can I just suggest that that there's a fascinating side to this, and I'm so grateful to Paul for his input here. It makes clear to me that someone like Churchill, probably one of the most quoted people in all of humanity, he said, "History shall speak well of me, for I shall write it." And one of the great points that we've got that's available to us here is the opportunity to explore much wider all of what we have heard today with so much more. But today is about intention and how we can display intention well. And this is where as I say, Paul, you demonstrate so well the dimensions of intention, the breadth of your studies, the depth and passion that you hold, the focus, the courage and the passion, mostly the courage, because as we knew, having you on here, as you know everywhere that you speak about these things, you jolly well are courageous. And until people hear and the right opportunities are taken to explore all that, we won't get to the end. But it's not on an hour and a half program on intention that we will get to the end of it. What I would like to finish with, and it's to do with intention, there was a lovely story by the usual Plato Aristotle world, where most things seem to have happened at least once. There's a time when someone's head was held under the water, and in jumping them up again, they were asked, "Are you hungry for knowledge?" And the guy, I just don't know, plunged again and again, until eventually, when you are as hungry for knowledge as you are for air, with your head underwater, then we will get somewhere. And I think that's the same with intention. When we are all powered up with passion, intention, determination, and all those things, and it's all built on very firm ground, as firm as we can get it, then that will be the time when intention will change this world.
Well put.
So what I want to say, because this was a fascinating progression that happened here. From my perspective, looking at how do we tackle the real world, history is terrific, and history gives us values, and it gives us perspectives, and it gives us, and philosophy and ethnocentrism and culture and all that stuff gives us history. But I'll tell you what, right now we're between a rock and a hard spot. And it isn't about who's right about the past. It isn't about any of that. But I'll tell you what, I'm living in Washington State right now in the middle of a tornado with indigenous people on the north, indigenous people on the south, indigenous people on the east and the west. And I got a sheriff sitting right here in downtown Bellingham who's ready to play the legal card game because he is authorized to do it. And I'll tell you what, this is a difficult subject to bring forward here today. And I get all the prejudices and I get the philosophies, and I've listened to all kinds of people talking about shit up here. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. That's not appropriate. But we can talk all we want about here. But I'll tell you what, if I'm pulling my teenagers out of the ditch, I need them to get in their heart. And I need every single one of us to get in our heart. And that's one of the reasons I was willing to bring this subject to the market right now, because you know what? It's really easy to fight about the Jews versus the Christians, or this oligarch or that oligarch. But unless we bring some air into the conversation and open it up, which is exactly what the three of you and me did today, we now have air to have the conversation. And I'll tell you what, that's the power of the intention here today, folks. And I have a woman's perspective on how, and I want to speak to this because it is a woman's perspective, because I am a mother. And I birthed children And my children are at the side effect of all this male shit that's going on in the world and all the different masculine and feminine war games that are happening. And it's my children who are on the front lines right now, who had to go through the high school period when heavy duty rap was being pushed into it. I've had to sit and watch Trump and watch the male dominated, and I'm sorry if the female played part of that game. Okay, the females allow it. You don't talk to the Christians if you don't have women out there supporting their men in being cruel and mean and violent. Mm. Okay, I have entire religions, and I don't care which religion it is. If you're punishing children and you're doing pedophilia, you're out of bounds, folks. You're killing our children for the future. And that's not okay. And I don't care about philosophy. I really don't care about history unless it's setting us up today to take fear and turn it into punishment and kill our whales and kill our animals and kill everything. Stop it. Just stop it. We have to start differently. And you know what? I started out this conversation yesterday because the fact is we are in a noose, a legal noose, a physical noose, and we're living in a divine world that is N-O-U-S. Our world is beautiful. And I'll tell you what got me really moving on this game. I went to a school one day after I realized we were going to war again. And I walked into the school and there's this young woman behind the countertop. She's 18 years old, maybe. You know what I asked her? I said, you know what? I cannot believe that we're going to war again. What the hell are we doing? I mean, and I don't think I said that hell then. I was more polite, but I said, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And she says, oh, I know exactly. And I said, what? We have to, it's a righteous war. We have to exterminate all those people who are not Christians. And we have to, this kind of, and she went off. Oh my God, she went off on all these beliefs about how we have to kill each other so that we can all die, so we can all go to heaven. And I mean, I was aghast. I'd never been confronted with an 18-year-old, beautiful, gorgeous young woman that was so vile. And I went out to the car and I sat. And I just went, oh my God, what would I have to think to believe that? Mm-hmm. And what would have had to created my form that I believe that so vehemently that I could justify the killing of millions of people and millions of species and animals all over this planet? What would I have to believe? And I sat for a while and I went, you know what? Down at the base of everything else I've done, I have to think about, do I believe in evil and good? Because that was the bottom line of her question. Do I believe in evil and good? Is that true in nature? Is that true in life? And I went, no, evil is a fabric of our imagination. We create it because of our mythology and our fears. Evil isn't inherent in human beings. Are you kidding me? Human beings do incredible things all the time. We'll jump out of airplanes to save somebody's life. We go to war and take all kinds of men, and then we come back and we have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Why? Because it is not normal to be predatory and deliberate and intentional. So anyway, bottom line is I'm going to stop my rant. But bottom line, I asked myself a question. I said, okay, Joy, how can you prove that evil and good exist in the first place? And I went, the only way is in my own personal experience. Let me go back to my own life. And I'm going to ask you guys, I'm going to close with this question, and then tomorrow we can start up and we can do another one. I'd love to have these conversations next month or next year, forever. But I asked myself one question, and this is my closing question to all of you and everybody listening on this call. I want to ask you, in your personal life, I don't care how many years you've lived, count up the years that you've lived. How many people in this world do you personally know who are evil? And get real. Give me a number. And if you want to write it down and email it to me, do it. But give me a number. And in all of your decades of this life, How many people do you know that are fundamentally good? And I mean personally know. And I had to sit back in my seat and I had to think about that for a while. And you know what? I know one that was absolutely evil. He killed my friend and he was the hillside strangler. And I would probably call him evil. But you know what? I know from his history that he was badly raised and he had problems. But I could call him pretty bad. There were a couple others that I found that are absolutely manipulative, jerky, awful human beings who are not doing good stuff. But by comparison, I've known hundreds, at least 100,000 people that I've met during the course of my life, 60 plus years of professional career life, 100,000 to one. Give me a break, folks. It's not about humans being evil. It's about us being poorly trained. It's time to change our attitudes and it's time to get intentional. It's time to get into our hearts and it's time to stop the bullshit and get down to the truth of how are we going to empower our children and be leaders of the future about heart intention so that we can stop the damage. And you know what, with that, Jim, sorry I've interrupted you. I get the trauma.
No interruption.
Good. We have to change. So thank
Absolutely.
you, Jim. And thank you for giving me this incredible megaphone that I just used. Talk about getting on my soapbox. I did it. So
no, this
give me
is
a
why
break.
we're here, folks. This is why we're here, to probe deeply into these fundamental issues. We are significantly over time, so I'm going to thank
Yes.
you, Joy. Thank you, Paul. We should meet offline and go over these matters. Ian, thank you for your ongoing wisdom now in the second day. And we'll have our third and final session tomorrow, everyone, on this fundamental issue of intentional change. How do we, within the context of our history, what do we need to understand and how do we need to think about how we fundamentally change our inherited paradigm? That's probably one of the most important questions in our world today. And I think, Joy, you're right. We've opened up many areas of debate. It's okay to disagree.
It's good. It's
okay
essential.
to disagree. Paul and I are both recovering intellectuals, and so it's good to have these kinds of debates. So it's all good. It's all good. And blessings, everyone. You're welcome to the after chat. You'll see the link. Stan just put it in the chat box, so you can just click on that link. It goes into a different Zoom meeting, so we can all see each other. And then we'll see everybody else tomorrow, same time, same station, for the final of 3 sessions convened by Joy. Thank you so much. Can I ask
a question? Can we get the chat? I want to know what everybody said, because I want to know how many buttons we pushed. Is that possible? That I can
yeah.
Okay,
I'll send you this. I'll send you the chat, Joy.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thank you,
everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye. What an awesome thing, Jim. Thank you.
Awesome indeed. All good.